Imagine owning a dinosaur bone or a rock from the Jurassic period. The fossil trade is in fashion, and it's a big, big problem. You're watching Roundtable. eBay today, and there for sale, Jurassic hard fossil, dinosaur, £24,589. Yeah, auction houses and online sites such as eBay are dedicating sales to prehistoric remains, and it's not just museums who are buying them. Even private collectors can snap up a dinosaur fossil. Should that be allowed?
If you like antiques, this would be the ultimate. Dinosaur skeletons, millions and millions of years old, that are up for sale, and more are being snapped up by private buyers. The fossil trade is booming, and celebrities like Leonardo DiCaprio and Russell Crowe have made prehistoric treasures fashionable. Every year, about 5 dinosaur skeletons pass through high-end auction houses into the hands of private collectors. Sites like eBay and Etsy have become popular online spaces for selling fossils. eBay reported a 22% increase in fossil sales in 2017. But some paleontologists are calling for a global ban on the sale of vertebrate dinosaur fossils. They fear if these fossils don't remain in the public domain, they're hard to keep track of and can prevent future scientific research. Others argue the huge amounts of money paid by private collectors outprice what museums can afford. So should prehistoric fossils be reduced to mere home decor or kept out for the greater good?
Very pleased to say that joining us from the town of Hill City, that is in South Dakota, US, is Peter Larson, president of the Black Hills Institute, which does sell these rare fossils. With me in the studio, Professor Paul Barrett, dinosaur specialist at the Natural History Museum here in London, and Susannah, Lydon, assistant professor of plant science at the University of Nottingham, also from the Palaeontological Association. We'll get into all of that in just a moment. I mentioned that eBay advert. What struck me as really quite amusing on it is it actually said used. And you think, yeah, of course it's used.
It's a fair comment.
Peter, let's come to you first of all. You've loved dinosaurs since an early age. Does it worry you that it's now become big business?
I mean, there's a little bit of good and bad in that. I think the really good thing about it is putting dinosaurs out to the public where they can appreciate what's in the Natural History Museum. And so, having them more available and more kind of center stage is a good thing.
You might know Matthew Carano, who's curator of Dinosauria, what a wonderful word, at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., who says the problem is that some are sold and bought without any publicity and just disappear into private hands, often without science knowing that they even exist. It's a difficulty, isn't it?
Well, we definitely want to keep track of where things are going, and it's an important thing. But there are way more fossils than what museums have room for, and so some of them going into private hands is not necessarily bad. After all these natural history museums started out as private collections.
Okay. Well, Paul, I mean, the problem here is that, you may not have enough room, you may not have enough money to buy all of these things, but if you don't even know they exist because they've been shipped off to be locked in somebody's private vault, you don't get to find out about them.
No, that's true, and that becomes a shame because one of our missions is to take that information, make it publicly available, and share it with as many people as possible, and at the same time advance the subject and push the science forwards. So when those types of things do happen, and some of these scientifically significant specimens slip through the net without the chance to work on them, we do get a lot of information.
So you get wind of it later on, do you? Because if you never knew it existed, you'd never know it had gone missing.
What you'd miss, yeah.
Yeah.
So we do sometimes hear about those things on the Gossip Network because some of the owners of these very spectacular, expensive dinosaur fossils in particular do like to brag about them. They like to show their friends that they own these amazing objects. And in some cases, some of those people also do want their material to be studied. So they might
Sometimes
then
they lend
approach-
them to museums, but sometimes they'll want to keep them to themselves. You have no recourse there, do you?
No, not really, because they belong to the person that owns them. So some of those owners do want to loan their specimens to museums, do want to have them studied. Others very much want to keep them as a private pleasure for themselves.
Yeah, Susannah, what do you think is the difficulty here? Because your speciality is the flora, the
Yeah,
plants
that's right.
from the dinosaur
Yeah.
era.
So part of our job as a scientist, how we do it is we study things and then we write papers about them. Those papers get published in journals, and that's how we advance science. If something is in private hands, we can't guarantee that other researchers will then be able to study that material in the future. That's part of how we work as scientists, is once you've studied something, you put it in a museum so that everyone else who does work after you can go back and look at it.
But Peter, you're the man who says he's dug up 10 T-Rexes. What do you think of the arguments you've heard that putting these things in private hands, whether museums have the money or the room or not, is a certain deprivation to the global scientific society?
Well, I'm sort of in a unique position because I'm also a scientist. I actually write scientific papers as well. And it is important that these specimens are preserved. And so the best way to preserve them is in museums, but that doesn't necessarily make them completely safe forever and ever. So the more data we can collect, specimens are data, even if we can take those specimens that are in private collections and scan them, for instance, do CT scanning, maybe even do light scanning of those fossils, making molds and casts of those fossils helps to preserve that information, whether it's in a museum or in a private collection, for future generations. And especially scans can be available very easily over the internet. And so you can share this data with scientists everywhere if we can just make sure that these specimens are recorded and preserved in that manner. I think that's even a better way than just putting them in a museum. After all, we did see a very terrible thing happen in Brazil just this last September, where the entire museum, the entire collection burned to the ground, and all those specimens are lost.
You got in a little bit of trouble with the law. I know you had to spend some time in jail because of it. It wasn't directly related to the Tyrannosaurus rexes that you dug up, but it was related to the fossil business. We don't need to go into that right now, but I want to ask you whether you think it's very difficult to stay the right side of the law when people are dealing in this sort of subject.
No, it's not difficult to stay on the right side of the law. I mean, when you want to collect fossils with permission, you want to collect them. Like I'm limited to collecting them on private land, and you need permission to do that. This was sort of a very special thing with Sue. Had nothing to do with fossils, but rather with
Sue being your biggest and best T-Rex. Sorry, I should point that out to everybody.
Yep. Fortunately, she ended up in a field museum in Chicago. So we had hoped to have her in our museum, but she's in a place where millions of people get to see her. I get to go and study her too, so she's in a very good place.
Let us consider why dinosaurs matter, because I mean I've liked them. I've been interested in them since I was a very young boy. But I was sitting thinking ahead of this program, why do they matter? What do they tell us that we need to know today? Peter, you can think about that. We'll come back to you in just a moment. I love the poster next to you, by the way. If you can't be yourself, be a dinosaur. But why do they matter?
Well, I have a biased point of view being a dinosaur worker.
Well, you can tell me why you think they matter.
Well, I would argue actually that, first of all, dinosaurs are interesting in and of themselves. They're some of the most amazing animals that ever lived on the planet. They excelled in things like large body size. They lived everywhere for a very long time. So they tell us a lot about evolution in general, how you evolve those huge body sizes and get away with it, how you become such a successful group that can spread around the world and be dominant for such a long time, how you turn into a bird from a large reptilian scaly thing. So all of those things are really interesting in and of themselves. But another good thing about dinosaurs is because they were such amazing animals, they are a gateway for lots of people to get more generally interested in other aspects of science. So people going to the museum and staring up at a T-Rex or a Diplodocus for the first time, they get that thrill of discovery and that joy of discovery, and that may then translate into them finding out more about science in general, whether that's physics or engineering or chemistry.
Is it true that 50 new species of dinosaur are discovered every year.
Roughly, so about once a week.
And you've had a fabulous couple of weeks because you found 2 new types of dinosaurs.
2 in 2 weeks, yes. But so for me and my colleagues, so just this week, we've announced a new relative of Stegosaurus from Morocco, which we were just announced in the last day or two. And last week, we announced a new dinosaur from South Africa, which are a bit older in time and a very early relative of those giant long-necked dinosaurs.
Were there as many dinosaurs on the planet as there are now human beings on the planet?
I'm going to hand that one over to Paul.
No. So humans are specifically a very, very successful, very numerous
So how
type
many
of animal.
dinosaurs were there at their height?
Well, in terms of numbers of species, we're looking at about 8 or 850 species that most specialists would agree on are real species of dinosaurs.
How many real dinosaurs?
We don't know. It's actually very hard to go out there and count them in the rock because over the ages, the rocks get worn away. Only some of the dinosaurs that ever lived would have ever been lucky enough to have been fossilized. Their remains may have just been destroyed by predators and by weather. So it's actually very difficult to get an idea of the count. But if we think about other large animals today, things like elephants, they need large amounts of space to move around, to get enough food. And so we could use animals like that to get a rough idea of how many there may have been. And we have to guess that, of course, before humans got in the way and started
Yeah, we
hunting
did
and
get in
shooting
the
on
way,
those
didn't we?
things.
Why do they matter, Susannah? What do they tell us that we need
I'd
to
agree with
know?
everything that Paul said so far. I mean, that whole idea about being a gateway into science. I do a lot of outreach work. I talk to lots of schools. I talk to children. And I was one of those children. I'm still a big dinosaur fangirl, despite working on plants. They do something to our imaginations, don't they? They spark our interest. Understanding the history of our planet is really important. That big picture, how can you have an opinion about climate change or about whether we should be using fracking in the UK, for example, without that big picture of how the planet's changed over millions of years? I think everybody should have that worldview, and dinosaurs are a gateway for people to get that worldview about life on the planet over deep time.
And you, Peter?
Yeah, I agree with both of the other panelists. The dinosaurs, I would say they're the gateway drug to science. And it's interesting, we all use that same term, more or less. It really sparks, I think, scientific curiosity, but specifically in children. And so if we can get them looking at dinosaurs, kids can understand that evolution happens. They can understand that extinction is real. And that the climate has changed over time on this planet. And so we have to be careful. This is the only place that we have to live, and we need to be careful with this planet.
Peter, when you go out and you buy and sell fossils, you clearly know what you're looking for, but your average person, how would they know? If I wanted to buy something, how would I know whether it was being legally obtained?
Well, you should buy from reputable people. You know, people who've been in the business for a long time, people that, you know, there are, like any business, there are some bad apples, but for the most part, the people who do this do it because they love it, not because they're going to get rich.
And those bad apples, in what way are they spoiling the proper legal trade? In what way are they spoiling what people would like to do?
Well, for instance, the people that exported and sold fossils from Mongolia, it was illegal to export those fossils. In those cases, they actually destroyed skeletons by taking the skulls or taking the claws or taking the teeth, and that's reprehensible. You know, so you want to make sure
This would be where there might have been, and it was a might have been, an entire skull, and they didn't care about it. They just smashed it up and grabbed the teeth. Is that right?
Correct. Now, so I don't have any specific information, but I have seen a couple of skulls that came from Mongolia where there were cervical vertebrae attached, and all there was the skull. So, you know, what happened to the rest of that skeleton?
Are the regulations, Susannah or Paul here, are they tight enough?
Well, I mean, part of the issue is that it's different around the world. Different places have different laws. Some countries have a very clear sort of, you will not take fossil material, well, vertebrate fossil material out of the country. So some places have that kind of rule. Other places, it's like it's the landowner's property. So part of it is fossil and collectors in different places have different rules to adhere to. And we need to be aware of that when material comes our way.
So go into those countries that have very strict rules about what you can and cannot take out of the country, what you might or might not be able to pull out of the ground originally. What is generally their motivation for this? Is it because they're valuable to these countries because they're less developed, they could be a source of income? Or what?
Well, Obviously, fossils in some circles are regarded as commodities. They have a value, they have a scientific value, but they also have a commercial value. That will be part of it, but part of it is it's the heritage of your country. The fossils that belong in your land are part of your land's history. And so that's why a lot of nations are actually very keen that their material stays in their country. If you found a fossil in China, it's part of China's Earth heritage.
But not so much in this country. If I went down to Jurassic stretch called Chesil
Jurassic
Beach area.
Coast.
Yeah, Dorset.
Yeah, Dorset,
south of
absolutely.
England. I could fill my pockets with fossils and nobody would give a hoot.
As long as you weren't at a site of special scientific interest.
Well, it might be of scientific interest afterwards, because I might have found something
So,
scientifically interesting. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do see what you're saying. I think there's a world of difference between an amateur collector, someone just going along the beach collecting things, and someone who's in it for commercial gain. Someone who's in it doing it as a business is different from you on holiday collecting a few fossils.
And are there people out there getting rich doing this?
To be fair,
I'm not looking at it as a business opportunity, by the way. I'm simply wondering if some of these cowboys are actually sort of making...
I don't think there's anyone out there that would be having huge yachts moored off the Mediterranean coast or anything like that in terms of doing this. There are a relatively small number of people in Europe and in the US and one or two other places around the world that make a living at doing this. I don't think any of these people are multimillionaires or living the high life as a result of engaging in this trade. And another interesting flip side of this, from our point of view, is that in some parts of the world, the fossil trade is actually underpinning some very deprived local economies. So, for example, there is a very flourishing fossil trade in Madagascar and also especially in Morocco. And in those two countries in particular, there are significant numbers of people involved in the commercial finding and cleaning of fossils and preparing them for sale. And in some of those very rural communities in what are effectively developing countries in the global south, those commodities are actually very useful for those communities. And so there then becomes a moral question for us. If we do decide that it's just not possible to keep fossils at all, are we then depriving people of a regular income because we have this moral objection to what they're doing commercially? So there's a whole range of activity here, going from people who, like Pete, are able to excavate whole dinosaur skeletons expertly, mount them for museums and study them at the same time, all the way down through to people who are local farmers or villagers that are going out every day with a hammer and collecting in a trench in their backyard to feed a family on subsistence levels. So it's quite a complex question morally as well as legally, because different countries, as Susannah said, have different regulations. There's no overriding international rule on what a significant fossil is or whether a fossil should be allowed to be collected or not, ranging from complete bans all the way through to a more laissez-faire attitude. And really for dinosaurs in particular, there's only really a couple of places in the world where it is legal to buy and sell a dinosaur as a private institution. And one of those is the USA.
OK, so let's come back to you, Peter. True, though, isn't it, that what was selling for, let's say, $10,000 20 years ago is now selling for perhaps 10 times that, depending on, the type of publicity it's gotten based on films like Jurassic Park, which have raised an international interest in dinosaurs. If it's a booming business, and you talk about speculators and cowboys being out there, there needs to be some kind of tighter regulation. Is that at all in the wind?
So, not as far as I know, that there's nothing really where somebody's trying to ban the collection and commercial sale of fossils. And I think it would be a bad thing if we think about it too hard, because, for instance, things like the Green River Formation, if we had only had scientists collecting the Green River Formation, it's an Eocene age lake deposit, we would know about the 5 most common fish, but we wouldn't know about all the reptiles, all the mammals, all the insects, all the plants that occur with these fish, because they are so rare. And without having that information that is provided by commercial collectors, we wouldn't have that information. In fact, some of the most fantastic dinosaur discoveries were made in China over the last 20 years because farmers are out digging and they're selling their stuff. They're not allowed to export them to the United States, for instance, but they sell them within the country. And because of that, we've found out all of these dinosaurs that have feathers, the psittacosaurs ceratopsian relatives that have hair growing out of their bodies, and all these wonderful discoveries of complete animals with skin and hair and feathers we would have never seen except for the commercial activity that happens. So you get a bunch of people out there collecting in sites where fossils are rare, and they're doing it because they're making money, actually helps the science.
Yeah, I suppose in a way it is a little bit like the argument for wild game hunting, isn't it? That if you allow some of it, then it helps to pay for the protection of the species, in this case for Susannah, the discovery or more discoveries that would be of interest to you people.
Absolutely, and so when I'm teaching students about the whole process of fossilization, the flowchart that I show them is the end bit is the fossil is found by somebody who has the expertise to interpret what it actually is. If a fossil isn't found and it erodes away, no one gets any information. Likewise, if no one ever digs it up, same deal. It's not black and white. Obviously, collecting the fossils in the first place has got to be part of the process. It's whether they're collected with the contextual information that goes with them. So from the scientific point of view, it's really important that you know where that fossil has come from exactly, which beds it in, what else is in there.
But are you therefore happy with the notion of commercial fossilization, not fossilization, fossil hunting, if you like, alongside scientific fossil
I think commercial fossil collecting can be done scientifically. I don't think there is a black and white there. I think that there are people like Peter who have a good background in paleontology. I'm not sure that all fossil collecting is that,
above board.
Above board, yeah. Not everybody is operating to those high standards.
Shall we talk about the most exciting things that have ever happened to you when you've looked at a dinosaur bone or a fossil or something like that? Because we've only got a few more minutes, and you may be enthusing a new generation if you sort of impart this information to them. So for you, what was that massive light bulb moment? Because you head of dinosaurs at the Natural History Museum. I mean, that is big.
Well, I'm trying to think of exciting moments that don't involve the fear of dropping something or being crushed by something when working underneath it. For me, I think it's a genuine, most work that we do is genuine discovery. So not very many people have the chance to actually see a dinosaur bone coming out of the ground for the first time. And I think that first moment that you find a dinosaur bone still in the ground, and you are the first person in tens of millions of years to see that object and recognise it for what it is.
Big difference there between a bone and a fossil, isn't there?
Oh, and that works for any fossil, any fossil that you find. So we were talking about the Jurassic coast earlier. If you go there, you walk along the beach, you pick up an ammonite on the coast at Lyme Regis, you're probably the first human to have seen that in 200 million years. So it doesn't matter if it's a big spectacular dinosaur fossil or an ammonite, you're still finding something
But more
brand
exciting
new.
to find a bone or a fossilised bone?
For me, a fossilised bone, but again, I'm biased because I work on dinosaurs. But
I guess you're not finding much flora that is still existing, like, woolly mammoth bones have been found almost intact because of the swamps or whatever
with
they've
plants,
preserved it.
you find, you'd be actually amazed what you can see about plants. So there are fossils from about 400 million years ago, so just when life was moving onto land, plant fossils preserved with cellular detail. They've been preserved, they've been petrified, they've been replaced with silica. And you can see the cells that are there in a plant from 400 million years ago, way before the dinosaurs. You've got this
And from
exquisite
that,
detail.
can you work out where we get certain species of trees that
you
we
can
see today?
You can follow the evolution of plants all the way through from these earliest land plants all the way through to the diversity of plants that we have today. You can follow that story.
Fantastic.
You can see which plants were with which dinosaurs and build ecosystems, understand the whole ecosystem, not just the big apex predators.
Peter, there can't be anything much more exciting in your business than digging up 10 T-Rexes. Are you hoping for more?
Yes, in fact, we're hoping to get out this fall yet to begin work on a new T-Rex discovery. So,
Well, tell us a bit.
So I can't tell you too much about that one yet because we still
I won't
haven't
tell
got-
anybody.
But so far we found two dentaries, two parts of the lower jaws, the tooth holders in the lower jaws, and there's no reason to think that the rest of it's not going to be there. But besides the T-Rex, I've been very fortunate to have been involved in collecting the first associated skeleton of Smilodon and a brand new family of fossil whales called the walrus whales, and from my work in Peru. And that's pretty exciting to find a new family of whales.
And the moment when you realize what you found, can you describe it?
Euphoria. Discovery is probably one of the most addictive things in this world, and it pumps your adrenaline, and you're like when we dug Sue, it was 17 days of pure joy.
And it makes you contemplate, Peter, thank you very much. It makes you contemplate yourself, doesn't it? Our relative insignificance, both in terms of
Absolutely.
size and time.
I mean, that's one of my things that I like to stress to people is how can you have a proper sense of the insignificance of human beings unless you've got that picture of deep time, that picture of, we're working on a scale of millions
listen,
of
let
years.
us hope. Thank you very much indeed too, Paul. Hope to see you at the Natural History Museum. Peter, thank you. Susannah, it's been fascinating. That is one of the things, isn't it? We have to preserve it so that we can see where we fit into this whole picture and perhaps how tiny we really are. In some great plan, who knows whose plan, but we may find out one day. Listen, thank you. Thank you for watching. I'm David Foster. This has been Roundtable. Hope to have your company on another occasion. Goodbye for now.